Welcome to Psalm 37 today. Just a great psalm, great study today. This is God's word for us. And through David, the king of Israel, David is sharing his eternal perspective that he's gathered in his old age. We start out by saying that perseverance and faith is a blessing for the church. And in this psalm, David shares with Israel the wisdom and perspective his many years with the Lord has rewarded him with. So we're going to learn perseverance and we're going to learn to take an eternal perspective. That's what I've labeled this psalm, titled it An Eternal Perspective. We'll learn from Israel and benefit in the church. I'm going to point out that in verse 25, let me scoot down there. You can see it. Well, let me switch over to the psalm and go down to verse 25. Look what David says here. I have been young and now I am old. I know that's true of several of you. And I pray that in your old age, you've gathered wisdom. It's not always the case, but for the godly and for those who have been following the Lord, it will be. David's age is his asset, as is your age to your church is your asset, that you bring to the church a perspective, a long-term perspective that many others might lack. So this psalm, as you read it today, it's kind of long. It's 40 verses. Psalm is, as a whole, has a kind of a two-pronged thrust, two-pronged theme, two themes to it, negative and positive. Negatively, this is an admonishment, a warning from David not to fret or be envious over the apparent success of wrongdoers. Doesn't that get to us sometimes when we see people who are not following the Lord seem to have just a easy life or just a life full of joy and good things? David says, don't fret about that. Don't be envious about their apparent success. He says, take the long term, take the eternal perspective. So that's the negative side. The positive side is the godly are to trust God to ultimately reward them for faithfully doing good. I love the repeated words in here: trust, dwell, commit, rest in the Lord. That's the instructions that David gives. Trust in the Lord, dwell in him, commit yourself to him, rest, all in the Lord. It reminds me of Psalm 1, where it's laid out two ways, either the way of the wicked or the way of the righteous. Or Psalm 23, which invites us to follow the good shepherd who will lead us to good things. I've chosen verse 4 as our here verse. As you recall, we're going through and highlighting one verse that we can meditate on. Here is the acronym we're using: highlight, explain, apply, and then respond. So let's highlight and explain this verse. Verse 4. First of all, take note that the command here is to delight yourself in the Lord. The Hebrew verb here is intensive. It's an intense type of activity that God is calling us to do. It's calling us to make a choice here, not to try to delight ourselves in material things, not to try to delight ourselves into acquiring power or influence or prestige or stuff, but rather to delight yourself in the Lord. You know, the problem is, and this is what David is warning about, that ungodly are kind of in a death spiral. It's called the hedonist's paradox or the pleasure paradox. The more you enjoy the riches and the luxury and the comfort that you acquire, the less satisfaction these things bring. So what happens is that those who are trying to find their pleasures and joys in the things of the world have to work and chase these things more and more and more to get the same kind of rush. David is warning his people against that. He says, delight yourself in the Lord. He is caring for the welfare of Israel, caring for the welfare of his people, as a good pastor or a good church leader would be caring about your welfare. So he admonishes them, as I admonish you, to delight yourself in the Lord. I think David is sharing with us the fruit of his long experience, and he's learned, he's had everything, and he's also had nothing. And he has communicated to us that the joy that really satisfies is to be found in the fidelity to Israel's true king, to God himself. And that's what he's teaching his people, and that's what he's teaching us. Let's go on here in our highlight verse. We talked about delight and in the Lord. And here we talk about he will give you. Let's just think about that. The Lord is the antecedent here. The Lord will give you. David's learned that the God we serve is not remote. He's not far off. He's not unavailable. He's not unconcerned about us. Rather, he is near and he's responsive. Do you want to know how to experience more and more of God's joy? Well, choose to delight yourself in him, and not in possessions and not in things that the world offers, but choose to delight yourself in him. And he will respond to you, and he will give you, it says here, the desires of your hearts. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that every little thing that we're going to want, a big house, a boat, a luxury vacation, does it mean that he's going to give us all things? I think that would be a misunderstanding of what's happening here. He's not a genie that's bottled up for us and waiting to grant us everything we want. Rather, I think what this is telling us is that God is going to give you new desires. He will give you the desires of your heart. He will give you desires, holy desires, desires for him, desires that he is going to satisfy. And as he satisfies these desires that you have for him, then you're going to desire to delight in him more. And this is going to be very satisfying. You're not going to fall into the hedonists or the pleasure paradox, but rather you're going to find real satisfaction and deeper satisfaction in the Lord himself. So, we've highlighted the verse. I've explained it. The next step is to apply it. What does this mean for us in the church age? Well, I think what this psalm does is it confronts us with two ways of life. Down one path, a broad path, the path that most people go, is a pursuit of pleasure and joy, kind of a frenetic pursuit. It's a trip down a road that's uphill and unending, and it's a constant fight to the day you die. The other, more narrow way is a pursuit of the Lord, a pursuit that's empowered by faith, begins with faith, and grows in faith. The righteous will live by faith. It's a trip down a narrow road, but a road following a shepherd who leads you in the green pastures, the quiet waters, the restoration, the security that you're looking for. He's a shepherd that leads us in his word. He's a shepherd that leads us to Psalm 37, verse 4, and he calls us to delight yourself in me, and I will give you the desires of your heart. That is the narrow path that we're called to, and it's a path that we have to choose. And I think it's a path that we choose not only at that initial moment of faith, but a choice that's made every day to continue to follow the Lord, to continue to walk in him, to continue to delight ourselves in him, and allow him to shape the desires of our hearts. So really, in terms of response then, this psalm calls us to take our eyes off the world, to wean ourselves from envying the fancy cars and the big houses and the luxury vacations, the power, the influence of the unbeliever, And instead, we need to put our eyes on the Lord and trust that through delighting in Him, we find true, everlasting, and growing satisfaction and security. May this be true of us, brothers and sisters. May we set our hearts and our minds on the Lord and allow Him to give us the desires of our hearts. God bless you.